Welcome to this edition of the MDM podcast. I'm Tom Gale. My guest today is Jonathan Byrnes, chairman and founding partner of Profit Isle and a senior lecturer at MIT. Jonathan has been a longtime contributor to MDM, as well as many leading business publications. He's a prolific author, most recently in 2021, of a book co-authored with his business partner, John Wass, Choose Your Customer: How to Compete with the Digital Giants and Thrive. We'll touch on that today a bit later. He will be presenting at our virtual Profitability Summit on July 19th. You can register for that free full-day program at mdm.com/Profitability Summit 2023. Throughout his career as a consultant and leader of a SaaS software profit analytics firm, Jonathan has developed innovative supply chain and logistics concepts that have accelerated the profitability of many leading companies over several decades, to the tune of well over $100 billion, with a strong focus on distribution. Jonathan served on the board of directors of MSC Industrial for over a decade and on the boards of directors or boards of advisors of several private companies. Most importantly, he's been a generous mentor to countless students and others in the industry, and a dear friend to many, including me, I'm grateful to say. I've been looking forward to this opportunity to catch up with Jonathan's latest work. I hope you enjoy it. Jonathan, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And I just have to, just preface these remarks by saying how grateful I am to having a chance to work with you, which is always a great pleasure as an old friend and a mentor of mine. I do appreciate learning from you an awful lot, and I've been a faithful MDM reader for a long time. And I want to thank the people listening in also for your time and for your interest.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I wanted to start things off today. I only touched on your many accomplishments and contributions as a true pioneer in profitability and innovative logistics concepts to the distribution industry. What did I leave out that you're most proud of?
Well, I really appreciate that. Leaving aside my family, a couple of whom went to the same school that Tom went to, I would have to say, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, including myself. I guess I'm most proud of my students and the work that I've tried to do. I'm a lifetime business educator. I think I'm different from many of the people who may come on, and many of whom are friends of mine. I have a doctorate from Harvard Business School. And I think what's really underlies what I've done is that, as I'll explain a little bit later, some of the work I've done, I invented vendor-managed inventory, cross-docking, inventory echeloning, and a number of the things that are standard supply chain cornerstones. But I think what's really important is that I saw that we're moving into a very different era of business. And we really have to transform the way the companies are run as a result of that. And so that's really been the theme of most of my career. I've discovered this or stumbled on it back in the 1980s. And I was working on vendor managed inventory with Baxter. And we're moving from an era where back in the 1900s, the prices were the same, markets were homogeneous, costs were the same, you simply drop stuff off at the dock. With vendor managed inventory, I saw that we are moving into an era where almost every order could be different cost, different price, delivered to the patient's room, delivered to the dock, deliver in unit of measure or pallets, whatever it is. And the way that we were thinking about business, which is just simply adding up revenues on the one hand and costs on the other, and saying, yes, we did make a profit, leaves open the huge question of, yes, where and why and when? And if not, what do we do? And if yes, what do we do more of? And that's really been the theme of what I've done ever since. And I think, as Tom and perhaps some people listening know, I then invented what I call enterprise profit management, which is a way to create a full P&L on every single transaction. If I go into Staples and I buy 2 erasers, a pencil, and a ruler, that's 3 transactions, which includes, at this point with Profit Isle, our SaaS profit company, we hook right into a company's general ledger, and we actually get the general ledger cost for overhead and everything else for each transaction correctly. And it's just been a very interesting and incredible and fulfilling ride for me. I teach that at MIT. That's how I teach finance and supply chain management. And I write about it a lot. And we have a software company, Profit Isle, that have actually created a methodology for doing this at scale. In some companies, we're processing 4 or 5 million transactions a quarter. So that's what I'm most proud of, Tom.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this from the standpoint of what's the fundamental problem that you've seen in businesses that led you to build out this concept around enterprise profit management?
It's really very simple. After I finished doing vendor managed inventory, I worked with Baxter, as some people may know, back in the 1980s. We were able to get 20, 30, 40% increases in both sales and profits. And so they came back and said, my goodness, do something else. And so I knew that they were one of the leaders in the business, and I knew they were making a ton of money. So I looked really carefully at their P&Ls, and I said, Jeff, that's right, but I don't know where. And I couldn't figure out where and when and why. And, for an academically trained person, that kind of uncertainty is really intolerable. So I thought about it, and it seemed to me that the financial atom of a company is the transaction. Again, the pencil, the 2 erasers, and a ruler. And if I could get a full P&L on each of those with a set of descriptors, one record, as they say in software, then I could cross-correlate and figure out exactly where they were making money and where they weren't. And so falling into this enormous crack were billions upon billions of dollars of inefficiency. And what I found, as I know we've talked about before, Tom, in virtually every company I've seen, 20% of the customers or stores or suppliers or products produce 150 to 200% of the profits. And another 15 to 20% take half of that away, if not more. And then the rest, typically half or so of the business, is making nothing. We call the first peaks, the second drains, and the third deserts. The deserts are taking half the resources. So there's incredible inefficiency. When I first saw this in a project that I did with Baxter, again, back in the 1980s, I came up with this and I saw it and I couldn't figure out why it was wrong because it was impossible. So I went over to MIT and, we had a faculty seminar, which is what people do over there. And I said, I made a mistake and I don't know where it is. And they said, okay, sounds like fun. So, got a couple of giggles. And I said, this is what I found. And this is my data. And I'll send you the data set, and you massage it any which way you want. And, we came back in a couple of weeks and everybody said, giggle, giggle. I can't believe it. That's actually true. And since then, we've worked on, I'd say, over $200 billion in client revenues at Profit Isle. And it's been true everywhere we've looked. Does it work everywhere? Almost everywhere. I think Mark Rich, the oil trader who lives in Zug, Switzerland or something like that, made $8 billion on a 4-year deal with Nigerian oil. I don't think we could help him very much. Dealing with a company that has like MSC, and I can't talk about whether or not we're working with them, but having been on the board, with 1 million customers and 1 million products, we can sort it right out within days.
What are the types of companies that really benefit from this the most?
Any company with complexity. We're working with, multi-billion-dollar retailers. We have many, many large distributors. We have some small ones too, by the way. Service companies, virtually anybody. And even, we can work with not-for-profit, but they're the name of the game. We work with hospitals. The name of the game is not to maximize profits. It's to deploy resources in a way that frees up more resources to make people well. So you have to think, pretty carefully about the objective. But we've gone into major, very well-known hospital systems, gotten 50 to 60 to 70% cost reductions with service increases.
Your presentation for our profitability summit in July is going to be around best practices for managing budget variances. And I think you're going to be essentially diving into the nuts and bolts of enterprise profit management for that presentation. Can you give just a brief summary and a few of the key concepts that you'll be exploring in that?
Sure. My partner, John Wass, and I develop a lot of the different aspects of Profit Isle's offerings in enterprise profit management from clients. And in fact, we have absolutely not a penny of outside funding. You know, we started doing this as consulting, and then we did it as software, and it had to work all the time or we wouldn't have a company. We don't have a single penny of outside money. Based on that, we were really pretty thoughtful about what works and what didn't work. We had some hypotheses early on, you know, choose your customer, pricing, and so on and so forth, that seemed like sitting ducks. And then once we got into companies, they said, yep, that's wonderful. What else can you also do this? What we heard in a number of companies, particularly distributors, CFOs, was that their biggest issue was profitability, budget variance. So the question came up in almost every, and I've seen this being on boards of companies and on boards of advisors and so on as a consultant, and talking to my students, one of the biggest board issues I know is understanding two things. Number one, why didn't we make budget? And number two, how can I fix it? And so when we dug in, it was very clear that there were three issues. Number one, the budget categories were too broad. And number two, they interacted with each other and it was not caught in the budget variance. And number three, many of the most important things were not measured. So if you think about it, budget categories are basically organization driven. You know, if you look at a typical beer distributor, the salespeople are comped on branch and label and brand. The operations people are comped on branch and customer segment. In-prem, out-of-prem, premises, out-of-premises, and so groceries, so on and so forth. So, you know, sales ramp up in, you know, in a region, then obviously you got to ship product out there and you have to build a sales force and that costs money. So are they over budget or not? Doing the right thing? Well, we have artificial intelligence woven into this where we can do a couple of things. Number one, and most importantly, when a company develops a budget, one of our clients develops a budget, we have software that virtually within a day or two, we can translate it into every single transaction using their budget rules. What label was it? How was it delivered? How did we bring it from the warehouse? And so on and so forth. So we reconstruct the whole, is it a new or an old account? So we can reconstruct their entire budget on a transaction basis and say, if you do what you say you want to do, this is how it's going to look like by transaction. You know, there's always give or take a little bit of variance, but that's not really important in the real numbers. So that's what we do. And then when at the end of the month, when they have actuals and we run our transaction-based actuals, then we run it against the transaction-based budget. And we can tell them exactly where they're losing money, where they're not, where they're varying from budget, and what's important, so that they can send notes out to the relevant managers if there's enough money at stake, number one. And number two, it's fixable. At the same time, they can, and we help them adjust the budget on a going forward basis so that their budgets are enormously accurate. I was talking about this with a close friend of Tom and mine, who's a stock analyst, very well-known distribution stock analyst, very highly respected. And he said, my God, we don't have anything like this for analyzing companies. There's nothing like this for running companies. So the theme of what I'm talking about is moving from the 1900s, where all you needed were these broad averages, revenues, costs, overhead, to what we need now, because markets have gone from homogeneous to heterogeneous. where you can say, well, we are ramping up sales in Duluth, Minnesota. Is it on premise or off premise? Well, it's on premise and it's the first week of school. Okay, we get that. Why did it double? Because they have some special programs going on. Aha. And I imagine it's the same thing for, dare I say, Boulder, Colorado, the first week of school. And you can then shape the company around kind of, every little wind that blows and take advantage of it.
So you have much better detail and real-time information to make decisions from
your budget's actual and your actual variance. The other thing it does, Tom, having been involved in a number of mergers and acquisitions, going back to enterprise profit management, the other thing that's really important is that when you go to do an acquisition, you can't just ask them for the sales file. They're not going to give it to you because they say, okay, well, you're going to say no and cherry pick the good ones. But what you can do is you can tell them, I want a profile of your peaks, drains, and deserts. I want to know the numbers, and but don't identify them. That way, you get a very deep understanding of what you're buying, and the prospects. You can see, are they stable or are they unstable? Are they buying a full product line or not?
No.
And so that's really, really critical. And then that leads, I'll just tie up to the final point, which is something that we're just bringing out into the market right now. It's in beta in a number of our clients, which is a profit index. So the question came up, what's a good, simple to understand profit index? Well, let's say you've got, a certain percent of the profits come from the peaks, a certain percent come from the drains, a certain percent come from the deserts. It's usually about zero. So if you take your peaks, call it 150%, and you're pulling off 50% out of your drains, then your read through from the 150% is 100%. And that's the profit health index. And so the objective is to do everything you can to move that up. And that's been a way to unify companies around this profitability increase. As I think back on, dare I say, the history of software, having, been there, as some other people have, I think it was all about doing a lot of calculations. And it was about, finding a killer app, and then what really was needed, which is what I think we're trying to fulfill, is a profit platform that ties the whole company together. And we've gone into big distributors, really well-known and wonderfully run companies. And they say, well, we read your book, Islands of Profit, my first book. We bought some software and we get these nice reports, curves and this and that. But, we don't know how to use it. Or if we do something, we don't know what else it affects. And we don't know how to project, if we do this, then this is how the whole company is going to react. And that's where we wound up. And it's really been driven by our decision not to take outside money in the company, but to live and die by doing what customers need and listening very, very carefully to what they want and how they want to do it.
You just touched briefly on this aspect around the socialization that you mentioned earlier. How challenging is that, and how do you try to get through some of that? Because I have to believe that there's a lot of long held assumptions within departments or parts of an organization. I mean, it's one thing to get the CFO and the leadership team on board, but what are some of the challenges that you've seen and ways to break through that in a company to implement something like this?
Well, it's a very good question, Tom, and thank you for asking it. There are a couple of things. Number one, it's having clarity on your priorities. The absolute number one priority is to double your profit peaks. If you double your profit peaks, you can increase your profits by 70-80%. It's as simple as that. If you take a third, let's say you've got 18% of your customers are profit peaks. If you take a third of them, that's, do I remember that's 6%, I think. And you're going to increase your profits by 40-50%. And 6% of your customers isn't that many. So you want to basically have a team of people who spend all their time doubling profit peaks. And that's all they do. And they know how to do it. Vendor managed inventory, there are a few other rocks to look under. And the same thing, profit drains. If you turn around 20% of your profit drains and make them profit peaks, you get a 70, 80% profit increase. And again, for that, what you want to do is have a separate tiger team, and all they do is do turnarounds. So that came to me. I was working with one of the largest in parallel, working with one of the largest financial services companies. It's one of the top 5 in the world. I can't name them, but you can imagine who they would be. And I interviewed their their loan workout group. I was blown away. You have this wonderful group of incredibly talented people, who all they do is go in and fix problem loans. And, I sort of said, wow, why don't you use this for your good customers, since you know how to make things better? And they sort of said, gee, it never occurred to us. Well, it occurred to us. And so I would say do that. And, it moves very, very quickly, because once you once you increase your profits by 10 or 15%, and we're getting 10 to 30% profit increases a year sustainably, everybody says, what about me? And then the other thing, I have an article actually that came out in Chief Executive Group this past month or actually will be out this coming month. Budget variance was the prior one, on how to introduce these sorts of systems. What you want to do is you want to get your regional managers working on doubling your profit peaks and converting your profit drains in their region. So each manager gets 5 peaks and 5 drains. And then you take your top gun salespeople and you give them 5 peaks and 5 drains. You don't give anybody anything else, and you don't give them more. You can't be like bumblebees bouncing from flower to flower, but you got the methodology with your your regional managers and your top guns. And when the top guns start increasing their, 20% over quota, everybody else will follow.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'd like to talk briefly about your latest book, How to Compete with the Digital Giants and Thrive. What prompted you and John Wass to pull that together, and what critical challenges it address for distributors?
It really came from, again, being in the trenches all the time, through teaching, through executive programs. I'll be teaching in an executive program at MIT tomorrow. And from the work that I did as a consultant and, work we do at Profit Isle, my phone has been ringing off the hook for years. And basically people are saying, oh my God, what am I going to do about Amazon? And I happen to know a lot about Amazon because one of the 2 developers of Amazon was a student of mine. And a lot of Amazon came out of MIT. All the math still does come out of MIT. So, they said, what do I do about Amazon? And, we dug into our statistics and we thought about it. And I, thought about what I know about Amazon. I can't do work for Amazon because I was on the board of MSC, a competitor, to the extent that they compete. But I still have several hundred former students in Amazon. And I talk with people from Amazon almost every week. So I know what's going on the inside. And what Amazon does is very simple. They do one thing and they do it incredibly well. They take the profit deserts that nobody makes money on, and they figured out how to turn it into a science, and they make a fortune. So what they do is they do onesie-twosie orders to onesie-twosie customers, small orders, small customers, in a very information-rich environment with unbelievably well thought out profit analytics, which I can't talk about. I mean, really well thought out. And when I looked at what Amazon was eroding from these, especially distributors, they were all the profit deserts, because you can't do vendor managed inventory with company A and defend your profit deserts from Amazon. They're completely different strategies. That's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow in class. And you have to really decide who you are and what you are. You know, do you want to lose all your money trying to, compete with Amazon in their game? Or, it's like saying, what would happen if the New York Yankees played against, the Denver Nuggets 2 nights ago, or the Miami Heat? I'm not going to talk about the what's up here in Boston. But, you have to figure out what game you're playing. If you want to compete with Amazon, well, have at it. But there aren't many spaces for companies, and Amazon is pretty darn good, as is Google and all the rest of them. On the other hand, the higher, more service-oriented end of the spectrum, like vendor managed inventory, et cetera, is wide open. And, if you put all your resources into stemming the Amazon tide hopelessly, and you don't put it in, you have nothing left to double your profit peaks and convert your profit drains, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
But you can't do that unless you know who they are.
Yeah.
And you know what to do. And so that was what we wrote the book about.
So it's really about
a comprehensive treatment of how to do that.
Yeah. So it's really about the differentiation strategies around value-added services that are difficult to replicate.
Absolutely. Amazon, you say to Amazon, can you deliver to the production line? The answer will be no. And not, I'm afraid I'm going to lose some money.
What's your take on their more recent strategy around developing the much more powerful procurement services to sort of wrap around the government, educational? Have you looked at that?
If you want to ask, for a distributor, how would a strategy like that affect the distributor? I think that if you were to take, a multi-billion-dollar distributor and you basically segmented the profits into peaks, drains, and deserts, a lot of that business is, number one is they want an integrated offering. That's where the government's headed right now, right? They used to put everything out for bid. Now they want an integrated package like the Japanese, Keiretsu. And then number two, a lot of the other stuff is sort of onesie twosies that, shouldn't be bought from a traditional distributor.
Sure.
Amazon is really great at what it does, but it doesn't do everything.
Yeah.
I know that's hard for people to swallow, but it's true.
Yeah, it feels to me overall that many distributors, after an initial feeling an existential threat to their businesses, have been able to process a little bit more effectively how they can protect some of their business from some of that Amazon impact, while at the same time really focusing more on where the heart and soul of their profitability and customer relationships lie.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the deeper issue, Tom, going back when I was in business school in the 1970s, in New York and Cambridge, Columbia and Harvard. In that era, you basically wanted to get all the revenues you could from every place you could, because what drove success was economies of scale. The more you sold, the lower your unit cost. You drop it at the dock, and you have uniform pricing and uniform cost. And so, we all went to business school learning, more revenues from anywhere, less cost from anywhere. You have a profit peak. Do you really want to kill their cost? You have a profit drain. Do you really want more revenues?
No.
And it's very hard to turn the tide. And I'm embarrassed to say that in the great majority of business schools today, they're still teaching that.
Yeah.
Even though it's demonstrably wrong.
Huh.
And so to some extent, I wrote that book for my colleagues who are business school professors, saying, let's take a look at this. And that's why the book is very comprehensive.
Yeah.
It's not, go get the right customer, but it's, how to deal with customers and service and all the rest of it and tie it together into a different way of running a business, which goes back to the first question that you asked me, which is what am I most proud of? And I think that to the extent that I have been or I will be able to help midwife that change in business, the fundamental shift of paradigm in a way that is effective. And that's what I would be most proud of. As a lifelong business educator, that's my objective.
And that leads me to my final question, Jonathan, which is, as you take a look at the adoption of this shifting paradigm from any revenue is good revenue to much more of a profitability focus, as you look out 5 or 10 years, and I'm speaking specifically around the distribution industry that you're so familiar with, I mean, how do you see the adoption curve go from here? I mean, certainly, we've seen, I think, in the last 5+ years where analytics is finally coming into where a very few companies 10 years ago were implementing and trying to build capability internally around data analytics. Where do you see that going in the next few years?
Yeah, good question, Tom. I'm tempted to say I wish I knew, but I'll tell you my hypothesis. Okay, I think if you think about software adoption curves, the first one is this a real problem? Or is this ridiculous? And I think most people realize that there is a real opportunity here. Number two, can you actually get the information? I did the original work on all of this. I published it in Harvard Business School's Working Knowledge in 2007. I wrote Byrnes of Profit and Sea of Red Ink, which was a bestseller, a few years later that had that also. And I've never, hesitated to publicize it to the public. As a business educator, that's what I want to do. And then the next question is, oh my God, it looks like you're changing the way we do everything. Isn't this impossible? And the answer is no. And it's very, very doable. And I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
So what I see is that it's the change. The change is changing. It's accelerating quickly. I know that I'm getting a lot of calls from former students, people who've been through MIT executive programs, people who read my articles, basically saying we're not happy with what we're doing and we really want to do something. When are we going to get to the people who say, this just sounds like too much, let's go tune up the warehouse? Well, again, 1/3 of the potential prospects will do it fairly quickly. 1/3, it'll take a little while to get there. By fairly quickly, I mean in the next 5 to 7 years. 7 to 10, 12 years, it's another third. And the next third is going to be, as they say, kicking and screaming into the 18th century.
That's as good a prediction of the future that I would ever ask you to give. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm here to accelerate it.
Jonathan, I so look forward to your session on July 19th at our Virtual Profitability Summit. Thank you again for taking part in that and being a part of that program. And thank you so much for your time today. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you.
And same here. Thank you very much, Tom. You're one of the really important people at the center of our industry, and it really is a pleasure, and a good friend. So it's a pleasure to catch up with you. I would just quickly add, if anybody's interested in chatting with me, my email is jlbyrnes, one word, @mit.edu. And I'm very happy to answer questions or do whatever I can to help.
Thank you, Jonathan. On everything we touched on today, I can't imagine you not getting some follow-up on that. So thank you for providing that final piece there.
Thank you, Tom. Have a wonderful summer.
You as well. We'll talk soon.